Welcome to the Firebelly Social Show. We're focused on talking to food and beverage brands that are on a mission to make the world better.
Hey, everyone. Duncan here with another episode of the Firebelly Social Show, where I chat with founders and leaders of mission-driven food and beverage brands. Thank you for tuning in. It's another episode, and I have an exciting guest today, Elizabeth Corbett, President of Enterprise at AE Global. And this episode is brought to you by Firebelly Marketing. At Firebelly, a company I started, we help mission-based food and beverage brands build deeper connections with their communities, help with retail support. So if you're ready to amplify your brand story, create some excitement and retail velocity around your mission-driven brand, head to firebellymarketing.com. And so it's been my particular honor to meet Elizabeth, and Dana Frick from Retail Voodoo, another powerhouse, powerful woman, introduced me. Elizabeth is the president at AE Global, and it's a company that's just kind of reimagining packaging for some of the most iconic brands worldwide. And we'll get into all the details, but she's been instrumental in creating sustainable, innovative packaging solutions. I mean, the client list is just mind-blowing. Starbucks, Tiffany, Estée Lauder, Green Thumb Industries, and Elizabeth is actually based both in Seattle and Miami. She's passionate about finding environmentally responsible options, no matter what it's made of, and her expertise and dedication to this make her a true pioneer in this space. And I'm also really fortunate to call her my friend. So Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My gosh, I feel like we met years ago, but it was just at last year's Sweets and Snacks.
I know, isn't that awesome? But that's part of what I loved about that show. This was my second time, but the energy of it being in Indianapolis was so different than the energy in Chicago. And sorry to Chicago, but the energy of your town is amazing. I just fell in love with it. I came home to my husband and I said, we should buy a house in Indianapolis.
I mean, and let me tell you what, we're going to talk about this more, but there's a creativity conference here that's kind of like a Indianapolis version of South by, called Rally. And I'm
writing this down.
I'm so eager to get you to Rally, and it's kind of a no-brainer. The tickets are so cheap, and I got like all kinds of food stuff going on. It'd be a great business and, personal space for you. But I'm so keen to get into some of this with you for our audience. How did you get into packaging?
Well, my background is graphic design and print production, which is funny because I'm one of the very few people who I think gets into something where that was kind of your start. So I went to the University of Oregon. I was in their journalism school, and you will laugh, but the only C in my entire education was in production for publication, because you had to memorize 50 fonts, and I just sucked at that. But then, right out of school, I went to work for an ad agency. And then from there, and I had a wonderful, wonderful mentor at U of O who kind of told me, hey, this is the path you should take. You should start out at an agency and then take that knowledge, and then, because you won't make any money. And he was right. I didn't. Oh my God. I think I've been doing this a long time, but it's probably the same, but agencies paid no money then. I made $15,000 a year, and my parents had to pay the insurance on my car in order for me to be able to afford an apartment. So, because I was not going to be the person who was going to still live at home. So I worked on the agency side for about 3 years, and then ended up on the corporate side. I ended up working for a company called Safeco, and that's actually how I met Diana, who you mentioned, because we worked together there a very long time ago, managing 5 different product lines in terms of all their marketing communication. So that I was very in-depth in print and paper. From there, I actually ended up on the paper mill side, and I was with a company called Nina Paper for 17 years. And I started their packaging division, which was a wonderful experience. And that's when I first got to work with people like Tiffany. I was involved with them when they were changing the pattern in their blue paper for only the 3rd time in 150 years. That was an amazing experience. They are very particular about their blue, by the way. It takes a really long time to get there on machine. And then I always had, growing up in Oregon, I always had a bent towards sustainability. I don't think we realized we were being sustainable. You didn't think of that, but my family had a half-acre garden. So it's like I didn't buy groceries from a grocery store until I mean, I didn't buy vegetables at a grocery store until I was like in my 20s. So we were sustainable, but we didn't know it, if that makes sense. Um, and so I was involved at Nina when we started making folding board that was 100% post-consumer. And that took a lot to figure out how do we make that so that it still performs, because there are limits of what you can do with 100% post-consumer fibers. And there were things, is it going to crack? Is it going to print well? Because you can make something that's sustainable, but it still has to perform. And that's true in anything, whether that be plastic or film or anything. And then I ended up transforming into what I do now because I loved being on the paper side, but I wanted to make the whole box. I didn't want to only make you the paper. So, and then I realized what I really wanted to do was I wanted to build you a whole solution. So that's how I ended up with AE Global, because that we're a privately held company and the owners have the same vision I do. Is I want to be that complete solution for a customer. And if I can't personally do it, I will find somebody who can for you. But and I also wanted to be somewhere where we not only sustainability is part of our core, but I wanted to be able to, again, in that complete solution, really be able to support the customer from the start. So we have an innovation lab that has at least 10 structural designers on staff. We have an in-house agency. We can do full prototyping. So we have 3D printers on site. You need to come sometime when the weather's gross, Duncan, down to Miami.
I love that.
And then, and we have full capability to do printed prototypes for displays, litholam, corrugate, folding cartons. And we do a lot of custom design for, health and beauty, cannabis, food, beverage, CPG, you name it. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And they hired me because of my background, because I do have a lot of background actually in cannabis packaging, as well as people like Tiffany and Starbucks. And then to build the group we have now.
I mean, that's just such an amazing story. And I love that sustainability is at your core. I mean, it's really at your core. I was talking to one of our clients, Kipster there, and a tremendous egg leader in Europe, and they've just entered the US market. And they were talking about how when their parents were growing up and they were growing up, sustainability was not an active decision. It was a survival choice, right? I mean, you used every part of an animal. You had a garden and you grew all these different things and you were doing regenerative farming because that's what you had to do. And so I love that. And Oregon, I mean, I remember being in Oregon in the early 90s and Colorado in the early 90s, and man, y'all were leaders in that space. You were doing and for the right reasons. You were doing things that was so ahead of everyone else. But I love that you're at the core and that you have a match like this where you and the founders of this company are lined up with Vision Hunt, and it's grown really quickly, right?
It has, I haven't. We always joke, when you ask somebody about their career. I'm pretty lucky because I don't have a super straight line, but I have a kind of straight line in comparison to some friends. But I think if you ask any, especially women, they'll ask you what are mistakes that you've made in your career and that you would coach others. And one of mine has been staying at a place too long and being a little afraid of taking risks. And this company tried to get me to go to work there for 2 years before I finally went. And I've always said that I'll tell anybody, I tell them biggest mistake I ever made was not going when they first asked me. But that's okay. I was employee 18 and now we have well over 100 employees. So we've grown really fast and it's honestly the best place I've ever worked. I love I have hired all the people who work for me, and I've known some of them for a while. Some of them worked with me at other companies. And when I was hiring them, when I was trying to get them to go to work with me, I was like, the best place I've ever worked. And they're like, yeah, everybody always says that. I was like, no, I'm serious. I'm serious. But I always worked for Fortune 500 companies. And there is a 99 out of 100 things are better. I find sometimes now, especially working for independent, small privately held companies. And one of the big thing for me is I love when I have a problem. First of all, I have a lot of autonomy. Like I kind of know what I can get away with, which is a lot. But at the same time, my personal mantra is find a way to yes. And it really is kind of the mantra of the whole company, where I find that big Fortune 500 companies have a mantra of find a way to know. And
that's a very interesting insight. I like that.
And the other thing that drives me crazy in big companies is you can come up with an idea that's a good idea. I mean, you just know it's a good idea. And if you're really lucky, it gets implemented in 3 years, right? Here, if you have a good idea, the danger is they're going to go, hey, that's a great idea. Go do it. And you're like, oh, crap. Okay, I got to go figure out a way to go do that. It was a good idea. Let's go do it. And
that's amazing.
I have heard that Amazon used to be like that. When Amazon was younger and smaller and more nimble, I've heard that was part of the joy of working there at the time.
Yes. And I think what's really what I really admired as I was looking into what y'all do at AE Global, it's like it seems like it's a balancing between sustainability, functionality, cost, and kind of at the heart of it is a lot of innovation. So the innovation lab makes sense. I mean, everything seems to be sort of like, hey, how do we get this done better?
Absolutely. And it makes it more fun. I'm not, every once in a while, I'll meet somebody who goes, oh, show me your catalog. And I was like, that's not really what we do. Right. I mean, there are some times that I can find let's say a stock jar that's the good fit for you. But the majority of what I'm doing is try to find either build something new, right? You've got a new brand, you're rebranding something, or look at something and be like, how can I help you do that better from a cost perspective, from a sustainability perspective, making sure that, whatever we're doing is still really representing your brand and that value, making sure it works on the ops side. Nobody hates anything worse than coming up with something really cool on a marketing perspective. And then it gets to the ops guys and they're like, I hate you. Right. I recently had somebody show me something that their marketing department had come up with. And I literally looked at it and I said, that's amazing. And it's beautiful. And if I make that for your operation on the ops side, they're going to hunt you and me down. And they were like, oh yeah, you're right. I was like, that again, gorgeous, but somebody's going to kill us. So those are little things that, and again, I'm lean certified. So, I'm creative. I'm not the world's most creative person, but I'm pretty creative. But I'm also really, really in tune with what's going to work in the budget. And I don't ever want to design something that by the time we get to the budget perspective, I had somebody fall in love with it and then they can't afford it. Cause that's horrible, right?
Yeah.
That's the worst.
And especially with this, as you said, emotional involvement, the dashing of the emotional dream causes a lot of misery.
It does. That's why I always ask, one of the things that I ask up front, people will say, well, what do you wish you knew at the very beginning of project? I said, I'd love to know your target COGS. I said, I can't tell you how often I have been involved with projects where people are like, oh, well, we're still figuring that out. I was like, you got to know something. Yeah. Because what I love to do is have my team put together something that is, let's say, 100% at your target COG, something that's a little lower and something that's a little higher. And sometimes maybe it's 10% higher than the target COGS, but it's so cool. And it's going to be such a great experience, or it really hits all the buttons from a sustainability perspective. They're like, yeah, I can sell that. Or all of a sudden, maybe the one we show them that was 10% less is really hitting the mark, and I'm helping them save money from those target COGS. But it's a lot of heartache would be resolved ahead of time if that's known, or at least part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I can resonate with that where founders a lot of times don't know the numbers. They're so focused on the vision and making the world better that they don't remember the numbers. And so that's really I love that term target cog. And you mentioned cannabis earlier. Wow, what an industry, right? And
It's gone through a lot.
and I mean, even the packaging and the branding has changed. I mean, let me say the branding and the packaging have changed so much. You've gone from, and there's still a lot of kind of rudimentary stuff out there, and you're like, well, how is this even working? But it seems like the sophistication is just exploding in that market.
There's two things that happened. One is that as certain markets become more mature, I'll use a Washington, a Colorado, even let's say a Massachusetts or California, branding is really important. So when Illinois first went legal, the branding wasn't as important to folks because there just wasn't enough weed, right?
You need
So at
access.
that point, somebody would go to the dispensary and they would take whatever they had, right? And in some states, particularly Illinois at that point, you couldn't see anything, right? You go in, has kind of medical office kind of a feel. You got a counter, and it's more like, okay, what do you have, right? Whereas in a Washington, Colorado, California, Oregon, you've got, especially in the nicer area, you got beautiful displays, all the products out. That package is going to get your attention, right? The wild little octagon box, it's part of their brand. You can totally recognize that, right? There are certain things for GTI. The Bebo brand is beautiful and it's elegant and and they've taken that brand and they translate it across everything from a vape pen to a gummy. So those brands have figured out, right, that this makes sense. And the state of Florida, the state of Florida still treats cannabis like it's illicit. And so even though it's legal medically here, it's super, super regulated. You can barely have anything on there. It has to be white. You can have your logo on there, but I think it can only be black. There's a big red, like, hey, this is weed, it's treating it like it's dirty. It's making the process feel dirty when it shouldn't be. So that's an interesting thing. And then the other thing that happened in cannabis is when cannabis first was legalized, 12, 13, 14 years ago, people went kind of crazy and acted like, this was going to be the biggest opportunity to make money in their lifetime. And they didn't really have to think about target cogs. And people were coming up with crazy packaging, crazy, especially in California. And it was gorgeous. I mean, absolutely beautiful. All of those companies are out of business because, I was like, just because it's cannabis doesn't mean you don't have to follow the basics of your cost and going to market and all of those things. So it continues to evolve. I don't really have a lot of hope that it's going to be descheduled or rescheduled anytime soon. I think it's still going to be at the state level for a while.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I think it's interesting how the proponents for, let's loosely say, human advancement and economic development somehow, when it comes to cannabis, and those same people are massive supporters of alcohol and tobacco, but when it comes to cannabis, there's a whole different mindset. So it's interesting to see that, but. Let's hope for the right thing to happen. I wanted to ask you this. I'm so sorry. I'm keep coming back to the innovation lab. Like, what
Why
role?
are you sorry?
What role does tech play in all of this?
What do you mean by that?
Like technology,
Explain.
like whether it's the design tools or the prototypes, and like making things better through technology. Does that play a role in your business, or is it more about understanding what the customer and the client are looking for in the relationship, or is it a balance of both? I'm sorry, it's a very convoluted question.
No, it's a combo. It's how quickly you can design things now with the tools that we have, especially think of custom rigid packaging, whether that's glass, whether that's plastic. That is advancing so quickly and so much faster than it used to. when I was in previous companies and you were trying to develop something that, let's say, was a custom jar, and it was a really slow process, right? We would design something, then send it to an outside lab. They would do a prototype that was off of their 3D printer, which honestly, 3D printers have, oh my God, so different now than they were even 10 years ago at CES. So they would come back, then we tweak some more, then you go back, and it went back and forth. But every time you did that, that was like 2 weeks. Well, now, we're coming up with different designs. We have some amazing structural designers on staff. We're coming up with different designs, and we even design custom vape hardware, right? There's that whole area is just exploding. So, and then it's a matter of, okay, so we design something, we're showing it to the customer what we think that's going to look like in a digital format. Then we're going and we're doing prototypes. Those prototypes off the 3D printers take 2 days at the most, right? Then you're sending that to the customer. It's such a faster process than it used to be, and it was part of the reason why I wanted to go to work here, and I wanted to go to work for a company that was willing to invest in that technology and that equipment. And then a lot of those items that we're designing do end up having to be made offshore. I'll use glass as an example. The glass manufacturers in North America, they really only want to make really, really huge volume for things like spirits bottles, beer bottles, baby food jars, right? They do not want to make 100 custom bottles for a cosmetics company or 10,000 custom bottles for some sort of health and beauty, nutraceuticals, whatever, even 50,000. They don't want to do that. So I don't have a choice but to have to go offshore. And that could be Taiwan, it could be China, Vietnam to a perspective, but Taiwan and China definitely are the two largest players in that space right now. Even custom plastic, because tooling is so expensive here. So I could do tooling for a custom bottle in China for $6,000, and the tooling here will be $100,000.
Oh my God!
So I don't have a choice. And we can also do that. Colombia is an option now. Again, Vietnam, South Korea. So we do have some other options, but North America is really tough. So, but once we've got it narrowed down with a customer, then we send off the close to final design to the manufacturing plant. And then we're in the final stages of those 3D model functionality. Sometimes we're working with things. We do a lot of child resistant stuff for nutraceutical supplements, cannabis. And sometimes that functionality has to have some play. But something that maybe used to take, I'll say 6 to 9 months, that process is now totally shrunk now to maybe 2 or 3 months from start to that point because of having all of that technology on site. You just save so much time. And there are some great outside firms that do prototyping in the US, but being able to do that all inside saves me so much time and so much money. So much.
I mean, I just posted about that on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I did it in the agency context. It's like, hey, you're trying to build an internal team. If you're trying to do things fast and you're trying to hire the best people possible who are already at the top of their game, don't build it internally. Like go to the people that specialize in it. So I love that. And I mean, just riffing off your beautiful bottle analogy or story, that's such a powerful marketing thing. I mean, holding something and the artifact value of holding something in your hand and looking at it, and regardless of what it is, there's just something tactile, and it's so beautiful to hold it. I don't know how I mean, all the bean counters, I don't know how you measure that. You probably can't. Maybe you have to look at sentiment and engagement and all that kind of stuff. But
no, let's look at alcohol. Alcohol is a really good example. So there are a lot of products for whom, and alcohol is a perfect example. So let's say you're looking at a bourbon bottle, right? It's a fifth of bourbon. If you're buying your unit cost at 25 or 50 or 100,000 or say 500,000, is almost the same whether or not you're buying a stock shape or a custom shape. The cost is the tooling. And what I find is most people, and I would tell, this is what I tell anybody if they're looking at a shampoo bottle or anything, is once we find out what your target COGS are, the real cost is the tooling and the time. And if you address that up front and just know, okay, we have the time to do this, I would tell anybody anytime to try to do a custom shape. In the case of health and beauty, if we could do a custom color too, and again, to do a custom color, that addition is very minimal. It's going to make your product stand out so much on shelf. It's going to make your customer, or if you're primary DTC, because a lot of health and beauty folks are still primary DTC, it's just a way better customer experience. Think about how's it going to look in your shower, right? How's it going to look on your bathroom counter? I think that those are all really, really important. And it's more than just standing out on shelf. But again, it's that take the time to have enough time to build your brand the right way. And if you can find a way to do the tooling, amortize the tooling, whatever that is, it can really make a big difference. Think about in the alcohol side, think about Angel's Envy. I can spot that bottle in a second, right? Think about Blanton's. I can spot that bottle in a second. And if I'm across the room in a bar, I can see that and go, oh yeah, they have Angel's Envy, right? That is marketing that will last a lifetime for them. And I'm assuming they're never going to change the shape of their bottle because that'd be crazy.
It's iconic, right? The one that comes to mind for me, I don't know if I'm saying it right, Clase Azul. They look like
oh yeah, my God,
a blue and white bottle.
They have four, and I really want to buy them just because I think the bottles are, but it's really expensive. But the first time I ever saw that was down here in Florida, and I was in a bar in the Keys, and they had all four of them, and I was like, oh, I need that. And it wasn't anything to do with the liquor. It was like, I want those bottles. And those bottles sell on eBay. People sell the bottles on eBay because they're beautiful.
I didn't know that. I mean, I know that I had not seen the black and gold bottle until recently. And you're right. I mean, they are collector's items. They're
beautiful.
There was a rum. Was it a rum? I think it was a rum out of Hawaii. I forget the name now. They had a lot of problems during the pandemic, but it was something to do with the buoy, and they shaped the bottle so it sat on its side, like how a bottle
that's cool
in the water, and it floated. Yeah. But the bottle was built that way, and they said that people never threw the bottles away. They'd keep them. They'd grow plants in them. They'd do all kinds of stuff. And I think that. Yeah, you actually answered the next question, which was, what would you say to founders or people that are like going to new products? Think about that lifetime value of your brand being in front of someone all the time. It's just
think about nobody throws away a Tiffany box. Nobody throws away an Apple box. Every time I've moved, when my husband and I were moving, we have a home obviously here and a home in Seattle. And in Seattle, when we moved into our home, we live in the city. We moved from a townhouse to a house. It was like 13 years ago. And we had a closet where the entire upper of the closet was just full of Apple boxes. And I was like, we have to recycle these. This is, and you feel bad about it, but nobody throws away an Apple box, right?
Nobody does.
Nobody does. And same thing with a bottle. And the other thing is, we talked about shape. The other thing I would bring up is iconic color, right? So there are, obviously you have the Tiffany blue. Think about Veuve, the champagne. You've got that iconic, kind of yellowish orange. That's the other thing that I would say is when you're thinking about your brand, do you have an iconic color? So my favorite color happens to be orange, although I'm wearing pink today. It's my favorite color. It makes me happy.
The Firebelly color, orange.
Is it really?
Yes,
that's awesome. But I just think that, you have to, and give yourself enough time, to do it right. That would be the big thing I would say to a founder too, is just give yourself enough time. When you're starting to develop your product, think about the packaging. We're working, with a new brand who actually found me through a podcast. And I mentioned that one of the things I love to do is I love to help people find different sourcing, even if it's not me, right? So this particular, I won't say what the name is, but they're coming out with a new line of gummies, and I helped him find who's going to manufacture his gummies for and who's doing his development and everything. But the great thing about working with this particular person is not only did we help him find that, but we've been working with him on his packaging ideas from the very start. So I love that opportunity is to have the conversation of, so how are you going to sell this? Are you going to start with direct to consumer? Great. Is on nutraceuticals and supplements, I try to tell people all the time, do a really cool custom jar, and then let's figure out refills, right? Because you do not have to sell that jar each time. That's expensive to make. It's expensive to ship. It's expensive for you to warehouse. So what can we do in a real refill perspective that saves costs for you, saves costs in shipping, and is more sustainable, right? So those are the big things. And are you eventually gonna want to be in CVS, or you want, or Amazon, or is it all going to be your own site? Those are all things to be thinking about when you're developing your product, because there's a really good chance that whatever we're developing needs to work across different channels, or do you want some differences across the different channels too?
I mean, that's really interesting. It's such a question of, or matter of vision, I think. Now look, you have been notoriously busy, and yet you have such a sense of poise and thoughtfulness about you. How do you take care of yourself? What advice would you give to people?
Oh, well, that's such a nice question. I went through a lot of personal stress last year. My husband had open heart surgery late in the year, and my favorite dog got cancer. She's currently laying at my feet in remission, so she's amazing. I didn't know that dogs could get chemo, but I've been through a bunch in the last 4 months. I think I'm trying to think of how I would say I'm really good about working out and exercising, and I walk about 3 miles a day, 3 to 4 miles a day, and I'm a really big fan of that. I think that that's really important, and I'm trying to think. I have a personal mantra that I think for me, and I have 4 buckets, and my buckets are my spouse, my job, my friends, and my family.
Love
and
it.
I find that if you're paying attention to all of those in the right way, that your life will balance out. And if you're off balance, it's usually because you're not paying attention to one of those buckets. And then the other thing I would say that I have not always been good about, but I'm better at as I get older, is to accept help. And I haven't always, I'm pretty independent, and I'm stubborn. It's okay. My husband would agree with that. But I think that I'm better at accepting help than I used to be.
That's great advice. That's great advice. I really love the 4 buckets. I think that I have something similar. I have 5, so I start with myself.
Ooh, what's your 5th?
It's myself. It's the first one. It's like I got to sleep.
I should do that.
I got to work out. I got to eat properly. I got to, drink the right things. Yeah. And for me, like, I think emotional food is really good. Music is emotional food for me. So we talked about Elton John earlier in those first 10 years. Man, I mean, you don't need to listen to anything else. Just those 10 records is so good.
So the one thing I would add is I did it for the first time a year and a half ago. So I read this great article about this kid who was turning 10 years old. This is like in September of 2023. And he was like, I'm going to do 10 good things for other people before I turn 10. And he called 10 by 10. And then this really guy had read it, and he was the one who wrote the article, and he was turning like 34, and he was like, I can do that. And so I read that, and I decided to do 57 by 57. So this is a year and a half ago. And I actually have it. I have this stupid little thing. It's an app called Todoist. And I have a list of things on there for me to make sure that I'm accomplishing every day. And one of them, now I'm 57, I'll be 58 in June. So now it's 58 by 58. And I make sure that I try to do something almost every day that's 58 by 58. And it can be reaching out to somebody that you know is having a hard time. It can be taking a friend who doesn't have a lot of money to a football game and surprising them. I've done that. It can be it could be big, it can be small.
You
So
have a little book.
that's,
You have a little book that you write it down in?
I should, I do not. I just know that I do it. It's something that's become it's part of my thing. I find that, I don't know if this is, I find is that I get older, I'm more thoughtful and I'm kinder. And I think that I'm hoping that that's true for most people.
This has been great. I really, really loved our conversation, and thank you so much for sharing your time today. And thanks for sharing
Thanks,
your
Duncan.
expertise and all the insights into what you're doing from a work standpoint, innovation and sustainability. And I love the whole cannabis and bottling conversations that we had. And if people want to learn more about AE Global, they should go to aegpkg.com, correct?
Nope, we changed our website.
Oh, you changed it.
It just changed. It's aeglobal.com.
aeglobal.com. What's up? And Elizabeth is
And if you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn.
She's on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing all of your time and your story. Thanks for being a great friend. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Firebelly Social Show. Thank you for listening. Check out firebellymarketing.com if you need some help with social. Until next time, let's take a cue from Elizabeth. Keep building, innovating. And also, whatever your age is, use that to do that by your next birthday. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Firebelly Social Show. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.